The Ghost Beside Me. Introductory Note. The paranormal is a subject I hold with the utmost contempt and dismissal. Quite simply, I do not believe in such forces or phenomena, and to entertain the thoughts of such is insulting to even the lowest form of intelligence. My profession is numbers and figures, specifically accounting, something which is indeed fact and fact only, where there is no room for deviations that rely simply on one's belief. There is no believing when it comes to numbers. They are either there or not. I came to embrace this rationale for the duration of my formative years and into adult life. If I were to approach my profession with the same subjective nature as those do with the paranormal, then I would be thrown to the cobbles and perhaps considerations would be made to lock one's irrational self away. On the other hand, it would be pointless to delve further into this account if my philosophy in life towards the paranormal remained as rigid as the formerly mentioned. Recently, I have come to believe that there are certain possibilities that exist where one's nature can be changed. We as people or vessels voyaging in this world can be shaped by the events in which we experience. Those who arrive in our lives even for a short time, and those who eventually depart, can certainly make their mark. I never imagined in 100 years my own life would be affected by a being of the departed persuasion. Strange noises, unexplained presences, nondescript events, visions, and midnight visitations are all something I thought to be wrapped up in the pageantry of fiction. Some even find comfort and consider such to be an appropriate companion with the season of joy and giving. We all know of those accounts or stories, and I am the last soul to ever imagine that one would cross my path. Edward Neville, proprietor of Fact, a soon-to-be senior accounts clerk, and loner for most of the time, by choice. This is my account in diary form of the events leading up to, and of my brush with the paranormal. I assure you that everything in this account is indeed truth. I have aforementioned that I only deal in fact, and that is all you shall find. To achieve the true authenticity of my experience, it is recommended that this account be read in a gradual manner by candlelight in the dead of winter. E. Neville. Initial acquaintance. October 22nd. My passion for numbers and appreciation for the finer details of numeracy is a stark contrast to my detest towards most social-orientated situations. This is fostered by the rather inadequate social skills I possess. The socially conscious mind must recede to attain such focus to the very fine bottom lines and discrepancies that I find daily in the profession of accounting. This is my present-day excuse, and I shall admit that I am happy to be of the introverted persuasion. If the evening commute by way of the 1756 from London Paddington was depicted by way of a landscape painting, my presence would be in the furthest background. This is the place I am most comfortable. However, British travel culture in general isn't a sociable scene, something even I am able to sense. Dialogue from all corners is reduced to the uttering of a few words for the duration of a journey. This arrangement suits me well, and therefore, like clockwork, I survive unscathed by the harm of having to talk small during one's journey. I have taken a room at Martha's house, located in the greater region of London, which is just 4 stops on the express. This quaint, Tudor-style boarding house is the residence of mostly other professionals, such as myself. The elderly lady who owns the property boasts to include an evening meal every night for residents, something I shall consider partaking in, even if this is a generous offer. I am stubborn towards social interactions. All of my worldly possessions I transferred to the house over the previous weekend, and so the short walk from the station was light, although the October breeze contained a bitter bite. Leaves of fiery red and brown crawled through the street with the season's change in full motion whilst I glanced up to the 3-story house and my home for the time being. A warm orange glow of interior lamplight flickered through high windows and invited me towards what I hoped would be respite from the bitterness. The warmth didn't disappoint after I turned my very own front door key that all newcomers receive. Upon entry to Martha's house, the sounds of mealtime chatter carried out from the dining room doorway. The rhythm of voices remained uninterrupted, signaling I had made entrance undetected, even after pushing the front door to. I stood on the tiled floor of the hallway and eyed the nearby stairs. Hastily I moved there and in the opposite direction of those voices. Of course, every other step I climbed creaked like an old ship navigating itself through a storm, but I had graced the first floor without being discovered. Pursuing the first-floor landing, I followed the passageway as it double-backed past the banister, and then along a trio of doors leading around a corner to a pair of steps. After an abundance of yet more creaking, I had made my way through the quirky Martha's house and to my door. Using another key, I let myself in to room 4. Everything remained like I had left it, while a brief damp musk hit my sense of smell. My trunk sat idle at the end of a moderately sized bed, straddled by a plain writing desk and a chair on the right. With the light casting in from my still-open door, I located a half-used candle and brought my room into flickering light. After a sigh of satisfaction for successfully receding to privacy, I made for the door and pushed it to a close. My eyes faced a shiny brass hook attached to the rear of the door, and I eased off my overcoat with every plan to hang it upon this implement. Upon hanging my overcoat, this hook appeared to wobble slightly, and only moments later did it give way, with the garment becoming a crumpled heap on the wooden floorboards. Partially flustered, I scooped up my overcoat and faced a narrow door to the left, presumably a closet that had previously slipped from my attention. I gripped the brass handle that belonged to this entrance, and a cold sensation hit me as it opened outwards while candlelight flickered into this hollow space. Efforts to find a suitable hanging device for my overcoat were to no avail within, and so I turned and slung it over the foot of my bed. I then immediately pushed the closet door to a close and followed the bed's length where its simple framework head sat snugly before the window's ledge. In the darkened autumnal street below, leaves began an abrupt migration with the whistling wind being their carriage. After a presumably hefty gust and shudder all around, the closet door behind me gently opened. Yet again my gaze focused on the shadowy space, and I made for it. Upon a brief inspection, I closed it and then scooped up the fallen brass hook which had failed to support my overcoat. Before I could place it on, or let alone reach the writing desk, this unruly closet door yet again gently opened. With more force, I pushed it shut, and almost instantly it forced itself open with that musky coldness hitting me. Following a brief inspection, the handle mechanism appeared defective, although my credentials in the matters of ironmongery are hardly adept. That is my chosen diagnosis. To abstain the coldness which seemed to creep from this space, and with no chance of the closet staying shut, I took my discarded overcoat and hung it over the top of this permanently open door. It shall do for now. October 23rd. My first night spent within the quirky walls of Martha's house was indeed an unsettled one. Perhaps the transition from my former rooms to the current played some part. We are creatures of habit after all, and this is without mention of the defective coat hook and closet door debacle. Not long after I sat to finally scribe such events, I found myself on the very brink of slumber. Uncharacteristically, I set off from consciousness without supper. Perhaps the rumbling of an empty gut was indeed the reason for an unruly night's sleep. It appeared that every hour I would awaken just before my unconscious state of sleep reached any level of depth for rest. A vivid memory plagues my mind, one of awakening with a gasp in the rather small hours. I recall the light being limited to deep shadows, and being startled to see a tall figure stood in the extreme end of my compact room. Even in the state of dishevelment, my eyes eventually adjusted to realize this figure was in fact my own overcoat resting upon the top of that unruly closet door. By the time morning cast light through my drape-free window, I felt far from ready to face another working day. With my grog apparent, I lifted my wary self from an unsettled first night. A soon-to-be senior accounts clerk can sleep post-promotion. Instead of my usual early evening routine of a solitary walk through Hyde Park, I decided to take tea by way of the Royal, a grand but mostly sparse place where much time has been spent in creating a palace-like ornamental hotel attached to the frontage of Paddington Station. Even though I boast to have social inadequacies, there are some I choose to spend time in company of, even if I am more of a passenger. "You are looking wary as usual, dear Ed," the jolly Humphrey Hardwick said, in between bites of a well-buttered tea-time scone. "Tell me, are you too busy to eat yet again? That firm will be the death of you, old chap," he added, and slurped tea from his porcelain cup. Before I could mount any level of witty defence, Humphrey's words beat me to it. He was a man who possessed a daily quota of dialogue which needed to be said. "You need only ask, and I shall put in a word at the bank. They are always on the lookout for number-minded souls. Dear Humphrey, I feel as if my journey to senior accounts clerk is too far along for a change at present. It is simply too good." "An opportunity to pass up?" Humphrey retorted. He then continued with his bullish interruption. "Those are words you have been muttering since we were both apprenticed at that god-awful firm." He suddenly eyed a passer-by before leaning forward. "Excuse me, miss. May we have some more strawberry jam?" The brute of a man I considered to be my closest friend pointed a sausage-like finger towards a rather young serving girl who had stepped into his territory. She immediately nodded and scurried away. "They never provide enough jam. You know, in the West Country they stress over the detail of a scone and such orders involving jam or cream. I have no time for such detail. Humphrey snorted and took another loud slurp of tea. This time my wit was armed and ready. And that, my friend, is why you are in banking and not accounting. Detail is indeed key, I said with a brief smile. Very true, he chuckled. But Ed, there are other pursuits in this life. You need a lady to marry. Then your worry will be eating too much and not enough. Is there no one you have met? I believe there is more to women than marriage and getting fed, Humphrey. They are complex and sophisticated creatures who I prefer to watch from afar. I admitted, knowing my excuses. Of course, I would be lost without my Mary, but there is no company like the companionship of a significant other. You would make a fairly adequate husband, Ed. Perhaps dear Humphrey meant well, but saying well is a totally different matter, although we shared a momentary chuckle. For a brief time I forgot about the apparent pressure I place upon myself in most social situations. I found solitude in forgetting, and I suppose as a species we shall do anything for a quiet life. The train journey out of London was indeed uneventful yet again, partly due to the choice and partly due to my own inner thoughts. Good old Humphrey was right. Companionship is what I need, but I feel as if my situation can compare to a candle without a source of ignition. Perhaps I just need a social spark somehow. Upon reaching the door of room 4, Martha's house, I discovered a folded pair of drapes sat by the threshold waiting for me. Presumably a small gift from the elderly lady who owned the house, and although they appeared to be partially battered, they shall suffice. My final task of the day faced me by way of recording today's events, and again an urgency to retire overcame me with the hopes of an adequate slumber. Adequate. That word again. On this occasion I made sure to drape my overcoat on the chair as opposed to the closet door. October 24th. Again I woke in the small hours full of grog and with only partial consciousness. Something must have disturbed me, and upon being awakened I abstained from opening my eyes initially. There came a feeling and expectation that I wasn't alone in room 4. I eventually opened my eyes, but alas, nothing. Just the shadows of my compact chamber stood unaccompanied. Although this sensation seemed strange, sleep hastily overcame such reservations. The day consisted of no notable events, from a dull morning commute to avoiding any eye contact at all costs. Eventually I found myself facing the door of number 4, Martha's house, and on this eve I was greeted with a tray of supper awaiting my return. The cheese and bread accompanied by wine I found to be a surprise well received. There are forces in this house which I gather have grasped my perhaps antisocial approach, an approach I choose simply because I have found no success in such situations. With a more so encumbered gut than usual, that being one full of cheese and bread washed down by wine, I decided to retire for the evening. October 25th. Even though I had found a deep slumber, it abruptly and momentarily ceased at what I presumed to be a similar time to the previous night. While feeling inconvenienced more than anything, my bravery to open both eyes arrived promptly. Only shadows faced my tardy gaze, and my mind began a wander towards an explanation before sleep found me. Every free moment on this day I spent relaying that exact moment of awakening, my urge to find rationale and reason unending. Just what is routinely disturbing my slumber? Did my encumbered gut have a part to play on this occasion? Is this a disturbance of my own doing? Is this due to change in my usual habitual situation? Could it be as simple as a late arrival to one of the neighbouring rooms? A stray creak in the already famously noisy anatomy of Martha's house? Perhaps both in succession for the same number of nights? Coincidence could play into such a possibility. Even after that second event, I found good rest. Perhaps this fair amount of sleep is fueling one's mind to an overactive measure. If only my focus could point towards a more productive matter. Casting back to dear Humphrey and his words on companionship remain in the very bowels of my own mind. Tucked away beside a rational fear is a desire to address the fact I am stubbornly set in ways of alone. In an attempt to find distraction from the situation in room 4, I set myself the ever so daunting task of exchanging all but a few words to a fellow express passenger during the evening commute from Paddington. Just the thought of such created a heightened sense of anxiety. My chest tightened, and the courage inside somewhere began to pluck itself up. I stepped on to the express with high hopes to just exchange a greeting with a solitary passenger, only to find the carriage deserted. Instantly I found relief in retreating to alone and my thoughts of what could possibly be behind these night disturbances. Tonight I am ready to discover more, and as I finish scribing today's events, my thoughts have wavered towards a very realistic explanation. Martha's house is indeed an older dwelling. I am hypothesizing that there is something more than just creaky floorboards or closing doors to blame. I may not be alone after all. My theory points towards a mouse. Seeing as my mind is awake, I intend to keep the rest of my person awake until an answer presents itself. Post-journal entry update. I have unknowingly omitted a minor detail about the decor of room 4. There is a compact fireplace that sits beside my bed adjacent to the writing desk. Tonight I have lit a reasonable coal fire to provide more light than usual. It is with hopes that this source of illumination keeps me from slumber. Post-journal entry update 2. The fire's warmth pulled me into a deep sleep, although I awoke at what appeared to be a time that surpassed the usual hour of disturbance. Early morning light bleeds in through battered curtains. Better luck tonight, perhaps. October 30th. Time tends to have a way of moving with such haste and can appear to go unnoticed. A number of days have passed since my last entry, and like clockwork the disturbances have persisted at a time I have pinpointed to be around the hour mark after I retire. This is only a rough estimation, as it is difficult to fully gauge when going by the rule of pocket watch. Visions during sleep appear to be vivid and full of memories from people and places of yesteryear. It brings a small level of comfort while I attempt to make this compact chamber my own. Every so often I see another vision, one of that empty express carriage, and with it comes a feeling of anxiety to simply strike up a single word, even without audience. My urge to not be alone grows for some unknown reason I am yet to fathom. This is truly a battle, and the battlefield consists of my choice to not socialize against being alone. Alone is becoming a barren type of hell as of recent, and I know the act of being social will lead to a reward of perhaps some level of happiness. If I could just break away from the shackles of that internal torment I have created that imprisons my confidence. Just the idea and thought of tackling this enigma of feeling spirals my own self into a deep sadness. Hence my lack of entries in the past days. With journal entries comes a reflection of matters that weigh heavily upon me. In an attempt to abstain from such ill feelings, I know there is much to be positive about. My health and occupation are in fine form. A soon-to-be senior accounts clerk has much to find the light in. Edward Neville has an abundance to boast about, but our fixation in life, and what we don't have, can create unnecessary problems which in turn lead to an unfulfilled existence. A known default for avoiding such problems is to discover a distraction, and on this eve I became enthralled in such a thing. The other tenants of Martha's house I overheard during one of their many rambunctious supper gatherings by way of the dining hall. Specifically, their conversational subject matter pointed towards myself and my reclusive nature, hence why I decided to loiter upon entry to the house. "Perhaps the poor fellow is yet to meet her," said the voice of an older gentleman. "Number 4 has seen too many tenants for it to be a coincidence," he affirmed. "Or he just isn't acquainted with the ways of ale, much like the others," another gent said, with laughter erupting. "Most drunks fail to navigate this house in their state. But I'm not a believer in this silver lady of yours. There is no truth to the matter, if you ask a person of rational taste," a well-to-do sounding lady admitted. And that moment a deathly silence followed. Perhaps they could sense my prying presence, so I covertly converted my loiter with haste up the stairs, knowing which creaks to avoid. My conclusion from their conversation, if you can class it as that, is one of mystery and partial apprehension. They appeared to be exchanging nothing other than a level of gossip best suited for the schoolyard. The mention of a silver lady only stirs my rational and plain imagination. I deal in numbers which are fact, not hearsay. October 31st. I can only describe my latest sleeping endeavour as Shakespearean. To elaborate, my deep state of unconscious found itself accompanied by visions of my own self in room 4 of Martha's house. This peculiar occurrence seemed to be a vision within a vision, very much like the bard's habitual resort of presenting a play within a play. Before fully retreating to those depths of slumber, I felt a state of euphoric comfort which seemingly brought a smile to my face. I knew just then sleep faced me imminently, and the space I drifted in was where I sensed something else. I felt as if I were accompanied by another. Eyes felt like they were watching me, accompanied by a sensation like nothing I'd ever known. In that moment, I'd never felt so certain that I was no longer alone in the room. An overwhelming sense of this force watching me gave only feelings of comfort. This culminated at the very summit of this sleep-fueled drift, and then a furiously deep slumber abruptly followed. On this night, my belief points towards what has been disturbing me, and it may have partially revealed itself, or oneself at the very least. This is indeed no mouse or late arrival to the house. There is no sound of creaking floors or the wind outside. My theory points towards it having a presence of its own, a unique type of aura. Even though I am not sure what I could see or feel on this night, there is something else in this chamber, and with it I had made an initial acquaintance.